So we're going to talk about a topic that I almost feel like or at least I have been dodging a bit over the last few years. This is a really common question we're going to talk about today, about building muscle and strength after 40.
Yeah, it's so easy to dodge this question for us because if you were to boil it down to a one-sentence answer, just do what everybody else does.
Exactly. And that's not very helpful.
No.
I heard a saying about that type of answer the other day. What did they say? Something about it being truthful but not meaningful. Like for losing weight, eat less and move more. Truthful but not meaningful. Something like that. So we're actually going to tackle it today with, I think, mainly a beginner perspective on it. But for those of you who already are in the trenches, you're hopefully going to be able to take something away from it as well. The question comes in from our subreddit, StrengthLog, on reddit.com, from user Svenitor. And this is what I assume it's a he, writes. As someone over 40, I'd be interested in how strength training can be adapted as one gets older. Should I rest for longer between sets? Do I need more rest days? Should I have more days of training but less intense? Do I need to do other exercises? Or should I just keep going the same as before?
Yeah. And the question is sort of kind of broad.
Yeah.
Does he mean until he's 80, 90? 100 years old? I think we're going to focus mainly today if you're like in your 40s or your 50s, maybe your early 60s, and then we should do another episode in the future when we talk about when you're in your 70s or even your 80s, because then things starts to become a bit more complicated. Probably.
I'm having the perspective that we're talking to someone who is like 45.
Yeah,
all of those other age groups you mentioned, the same thing goes for them. It's like it's a huge continuum or grayscale that you just move along.
And it's going to be highly individual as well. I mean, have you been training your whole life, or have you been sitting in an office chair and then going home to sit in front of the TV for 30 years, and then this is your first encounter with the gym?
Yeah, the general differences might get dwarfed by the individual variants.
Yeah.
But we'll see. But first off, let's cover our authority here. I don't know if I'm really certified or qualified to talk about this subject. I'm only turning 38 this year.
Yeah, you're just a baby, Daniel.
Yes, I am. You're the expert here, Mr. 45.
I mean, on a personal, anecdotal level, I definitely see a big difference today when I'm 44 compared to when I was 34. When I was 34, I had been going to the gym for 5 years. All the arrows were pointing up, so to say. I was getting stronger. I was getting more fit. I was building muscle mass. But even when I look at my own career, I have also been struggling with injuries that I had pre-gym career. And I got into powerlifting, which is a sport. Internal joke there. Anywho, powerlifting is not something you do for health. It's something you do because you want to push yourself and test your limits against other people. You want to become as strong as possible, and with that comes a higher injury risk, a higher risk of overuse injuries and stuff like that. So the reason my body feels like shit today might not be that I'm 44. It might be that I did powerlifting for 10 years.
Yeah. And I think we'll get more into that later on, that you've accumulated more wear and tear when you're in your 40s. But let's see if we can start this from a logical direction. The first thing that I came to think about when thinking about this subject is how strength training has become so much less controversial now compared to like 10 or 20 years ago. It's starting to get pretty mainstream, and I think a lot of people in their 40s know that they would be well off doing some strength training.
At least in our parts of the world.
With all the white collar workers sitting in front of their computers. Yeah, probably. But I still think and feel like there's a really high threshold, or it's a big hurdle to start doing it, with so many details and questions to find the answers to along the way until you are capable of strength training on your own. unless you want to get a personal trainer. But that is a hurdle in and of itself. So yeah, we'll see if we can try and straighten some of those question marks out in this episode. I also believe that most people know, or a lot of people know at least, that we start, typically as humans, we start losing our muscle and strength when we pass our 30s, something like that. And it slowly starts to taper off, pretty slowly in the beginning, and then faster and faster as we get older. And when we are in our 40s, the decline isn't very pronounced yet. Nothing much has happened compared to where in your 30s. You're a bit weaker and a bit less muscular if you just follow the general trend, but not by a huge amount. But when you get into your 50s and 60s and beyond, that really starts to accelerate.
Especially if we talk about the female part of the population that goes through menopause. It starts to accelerate. And this is without strength training intervention. This is like if you just lead an ordinary lifestyle without much activity involved. Maybe you go for a run once in a while or something like that. But you're not a fitness-oriented person.
Exactly. But if you do put some strength training into that mix, then you are much better off compared to those who don't do any strength training. So that is kind of where we're jumping in on it today. I thought that we might start. I have a fly accompanying me.
I saw
in my office today. Yeah, it's a big one.
Nice.
I thought that we would maybe start with some of the common questions and objections and worries about getting started with strength training once you have entered your 40s, because I think there's a huge group of people that are in that situation. And one of the most common objections, in my perception, is that it's too late to start. I should have started training when I was in my 20s. I would be buff by now. Now in my 40s, it's just too late. I'm not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, that's super common. And I think it has a lot to do when people who don't train a lot have gained some weight through the years. They see training mainly as a way to look better naked. So when you're in your 40s and you still haven't jumped on the bus or whatever you say, you feel like, oh, this situation, I'm pointing at myself here, this situation, it's unsalvageable. I can't do anything about it. It's too late. It's too late. But you have the whole other and the more important part of strength training, becoming stronger, feeling better in your everyday life.
Let's face it, nobody cares how you look naked when you're in your 40s.
Nobody. There's a reason you can turn off your lights at home.
No, I agree. And it's also factually wrong. Because when you are in your 40s, you are basically building muscle as fast and effective as when you are in 25 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, if we would look at someone who's 65, then we might start to see a general trend of maybe 80 to 90% of the muscle gain in relative terms, most often speaking. But in your 40s, no, we don't see any difference in terms of muscle gain, strength gain.
And there's been so many studies to show this. We're not just guessing here or claiming stuff. We know from studies that a 43-year-old man or woman will build muscle at the same rate as a 25-year-old.
Yeah.
But you might be starting from slightly lower levels of muscle mass in absolute terms.
Yes. And also, if we look like a lifelong lifting career, if you start in your 40s, you might not reach the same apex as if you would have started in your 20s, but you can still reach very, very high, probably much higher than you think you can.
Yeah. But my hormones are too low when I'm 44, Daniel. That's another one.
Exactly, with everyone going on steroids or TRT as they disguise it with nowadays, or it seems so as well. Yeah, so testosterone, growth hormone, estrogen, all of those decrease with age, and yes, they influence your strength training results. But when we are talking about the natural range of these hormones, it doesn't seem to make a big difference if you have low testosterone or high testosterone. We don't really see differences in muscle and strength gain in that natural range. If you bombard your blood with exogenous testosterone, meaning you inject it from the outside, then we're talking about so much higher levels that, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
But within these natural levels, it doesn't seem to make a big difference because, as we mentioned, even though testosterone is generally a bit lower in your 40s than in your 20s, it doesn't seem to affect your rate of muscle gain. You still gain equally fast. And the other thing is that the best way to keep your hormones up and in a healthy range is to lead a healthy lifestyle, which includes exercise. So, I mean, it's rather a reason for doing strength training than against it.
Yeah, most definitely.
Okay, so another common objection that I do hear from some of my friends who are in the late 30s is that strength training is dangerous and their bodies won't be able to handle it. Maybe they do have some wear and tear in their knees or whatever, and they just can't see themselves picking up barbells. I mean, they can hurt themselves vacuum cleaning the house. How are they supposed to be able to lift weights?
I would say that playing with your kids at the playground, maybe catching a kid jumping from a height or something, that would be more dangerous than going to the gym and following a controlled training program with exercises that are very safe.
Yeah, this seems to be a bit more common among women, and I recall a trend I've been seeing on Instagram for some while with women in their 40s saying that, oh, I can't get into strength training, it's too dangerous, and then they cut to them like picking up super heavy groceries while carrying a kid on their back, things like that, showing them that they are already doing heavy stuff in their life. And anyway, one of the biggest benefits of strength training is that it is almost infinitely scalable. So if you can pick up a pen, you can start strength training from that level and just gradually increase the resistance. You can almost go infinitely low in resistance when you start training and build from that point. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, and I think we had a new meta-analysis on this fairly recently, where they compared the incidence of injuries per 1,000 hours from different sports and activities. And as usual, strength training was on the bottom of that list, being almost the single safest activity or form of exercise that you can do compared to pretty much everything else.
And I might exaggerate now, but people who actually hurt themselves, like acute injuries in the gym, we're not talking about chronic overuse injuries that creeps up on you slowly. People who drop a 45-pound plate on their foot or something, they are almost always young and dumb men. or teenagers in the gym. Not taking the proper precautions not to injure themselves in that way. So
I think it was Brett Contreras who said that if you think strength training is dangerous, try being weak. Being weak is dangerous. And that is also very true. Because, well, as mentioned, when you are in your 40s, you might not have deteriorated too much from the body you had in your 20s or your 30s. But, I mean, you are going to keep declining unless you turn that ship around. And when you get into your 50s and 60s and you might have an accident, you might fall or something and get bedridden, then you might get in big trouble if you don't have that buffer of muscle, or you could dodge the accident or injuries entirely by building a thicker armor from strength training with stronger bones. So this is really, well, armoring up for the future, doing some strength training and becoming more resilient and self-sufficient for way more years ahead.
I see these people every day on the subway here in Stockholm, the capital of Sweden. They are office workers that are in their late 40s, early 50s, that are, their bodies looks like they are 75 to 85 or something. They are so, not the right word, but they are broken down from not doing any physical labor at all in their daily lives.
Yeah.
And their postures are sad. That's the best way I can describe it. It's just, you can see that they struggle to get through life because their muscles are so weak already. And it would be so easy to change that even for them at this point in their lives.
Yeah.
Just pick something up.
And as mentioned, it is dangerous being that weak. Imagine to get like a serious COVID infection or whatever and lying in the hospital bed for a month. You need to have pretty big reserves to get through that.
Exactly.
All right. Yeah, so keeping on with the objections here before we get into what to actually do, we have a few more. We've been touching upon joints a bit, and I think a lot of people entering the 40s, they might feel like their joints are too stiff or fragile, or they think that their family has bad knees or whatever. And this is, I mean, yeah, they might have a point here.
Absolutely.
They might have suffered an earlier accident like you did in football. They might have had a manual labor or have a manual labor, which makes their joints achy. But despite all of that, strength training is still going to be the right choice, because strength training improves mobility in joints, it reduces pain in joints, and it builds your joints up, making them thicker and healthier, making your cartilage bigger and healthier. Because like 20 years ago or something like that, the general perception of our joints and to some extent our tendons and skeletons, maybe not skeletons, but at least our joints, were quite a mechanistic view that they were what they were, and the only way you could affect them was to wear them down by doing work. Now we know that they are living tissue, and fairly similar to your muscles, they adapt when you use them. So if you load your knee joints, your elbow joints, your shoulders, they will grow and become stronger, more mobile, and more stable and healthier. And it's all about the dose. And once again, strength training is infinitely scalable, so you can start at a really light level and gradually build from that point.
Which is how you should start.
Exactly.
On an individual level, start at a level that feels light and controlled for you, and just start building yourself up. Slow and steady wins the race.
Exactly. So if you have achy knees, well, can you do 5 bodyweight squats without it hurting? No load at all? Great. Then can you do 6 squats next time? And when you reach 10, can you maybe start holding a light dumbbell in your hands and just build and build and build patiently and gradually? Okay, so those were the objections that I wrote down, but I also want to acknowledge that some things actually have changed. Not only the thing that you might have accumulated injuries or wear and tear during those 4 decades, but you might also be in a different life situation when you're in your 40s compared to your 20s or 30s. And I think one of the big things for people in their 40s is that, well, they are in the middle of their lives, and they often have a lot of responsibilities, and they might have less time available. If you have kids, they might not be toddlers anymore, they might be preteens or something, but work-wise, you might have a lot of responsibility, maybe supervising a few people or responsibility in some way else. You might be involved in your community with responsibilities from that point. So yeah, that affects the time you have available, and I think a lot of people get more goal-oriented or results-oriented when they start training in the 40s. They do it for a reason, not only to have fun and fuck around like you might do when you're in your 20s. They do it because they want to achieve something, and most often, in this case, maybe getting healthier, stronger, and building some muscle, maybe losing some fat. But on the benefit side, when you are at this age, that you touched upon earlier, is that you might be wiser, and you might have more willpower, and you might know yourself better, which all are very important qualities when it comes to training, because you'll do better decisions and you'll be better at holding yourself accountable to doing what you should be doing. So it's not all doom and gloom. You actually have some benefits going for you as well.
And you've lived a longer life. You have learned that life is full of compromises. So the time aspect of it all, when you talk to someone that's 25 that doesn't work out at all, it's always, oh, I don't have time for that. And then they watch like 4 or 5 hours of TV every day and stuff like that. But they are not willing to compromise. When you're 45, you might have learned that life, you always need to compromise in life. You always need to pick between different stuff. And now it's time to pick what's best for your body, some workouts. So how often should they work out? How much time should they spend in the gym, Daniel?
Yeah, let's get into what they do. And well, let's begin with the training side of things. The bigger goal is going to be to stimulate most of your body, most of your major muscle groups. And the rule of thumb that we often use in this podcast is the rule of 4, the big 4 type of movements. So it will be an upper body push, where you push something away from you, like in a bench press or in a push-up. It would be an upper body pull, like in a rowing exercise or in a lat pull down. It would be some kind of a squat movement. It might be a bodyweight squat, a barbell squat, but it could also be like a leg press or a lunge or Bulgarian split squat. And then lastly, a hip hinge, which is going to be more focused on your glute and lower back. So something like a deadlift or a kettlebell swing or a good morning, maybe a hip thrust, something like that. And the idea is that if you do these 4 almost fundamental movements, you are going to train most of the human body. You're going to stimulate most of your major muscle groups, and you're going to train almost like all of the foundational movements that you might encounter in your life. So you're going to be well prepared for whatever life throws at you. And well, yeah, as far as exercises go, there aren't really any right or wrong exercises in this case. I do recommend doing multi-joint compound exercises, which is a complicated term, but it simply means that you want to do exercises where you use many joints and many muscles at the same time. So for instance, in the bench press, you are using your shoulder joint and your elbow joint at the same time, and you're training your pecs and your triceps and your front delts at the same time. So that is a better choice, getting all of that in one exercise compared to having to do maybe chest flies and tricep extensions, meaning that you need to do 2 exercises to cover what one might do. Yeah. If you are short on time, or you want to be time efficient, or you're just starting out, or actually in general, it's a good idea to go for these multi-joint compound movements.
The less time you want to spend in the gym, the more you should focus on these multi-joint movements.
Yeah, you can add the opposite, which is often called isolation movements or single joint movements. You can sprinkle those on top afterwards or when you have more advanced goals as well, but lay the foundation with that type of movements. And then the other thing to consider when we're talking about exercises is what type of equipment to use. And on the one hand, it doesn't really matter. Your muscles only care about their internal resistance, but the point or the goal is to use an exercise that can create a high internal resistance. So we mentioned bodyweight squats, and that might be a fine place for someone to start. That might be enough resistance. But assuming that you're healthy and you're able to progress, bodyweight squats might become too easy fairly quickly. And then you need to increase the resistance by adding something external. That could be in a machine, or it could be with a barbell, or holding a kettlebell or dumbbell in your hands, something to increase the resistance. But you are really kind of free to choose. Like the things you should look for when you're looking at an exercise is it stable enough for me to actually challenge my muscle hard and train close to exhaustion? Can I adjust the weight properly? Can I get the resistance that I want so that I can't do like 100 reps before I tire out? That's going to be too easy. And yeah, it's got to be safe, I suppose.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're 49 years old, let's say, and you go to the gym for the first time in your adult life, and you're scared that people are going to judge you, they're going to look at you, they're going to see everything you do wrong, it might feel really nice to go to the machine park and do some very intuitive exercises that are explained on the machine. And we even have a beginner machine program that's 2 workouts per week in the app, because we know this is a hurdle, a mental hurdle for a lot of people. And it feels good getting started that way. But we also know that when beginners are tested at how much they enjoy their workouts, they tend to enjoy barbells and dumbbells and free weights more than machine training in the long run. So get started where it feels safe, and once you can enter the gym without feeling like a complete noob, start trying out some exercises or dumbbell presses or whatever.
Yeah. If I'm gonna generalize a bit, that the machines, they're gonna be fine for people who don't really want to make strength training their hobby. They just want to do it and get out of there. But if this like catches your interest, then getting into the barbell lifts and dumbbell lifts can be a really fun and rewarding, and as all good hobbies, frustrating hobby.
Yes.
But it does require you to, get that ignition that you start looking into the lifts, you watch videos and you read up on them, on how to do them, and you become a student of the craft, so to say.
Yeah.
But we do have a beginner machine program, we have beginner barbell programs, we have mixes that we call beginner strength training programs, and we also have an upper-lower split for the maybe slightly more advanced. They're all in our app, Strength Log.
And they are
and
all free.
While we're on the topic, yeah, they're all free. And while we're on the topic of the app, one of the other recommendations when you get started with strength training is to write down the exercises you did, the weights you used, and the reps you used. And then the next time you get into the gym, you look at what you did and try to increase it by one small step. So you might add 2.5 kilos to the weights, or you might add a rep on the same weight, or you might add a set or whatever. Just getting some type of progressive overload, as it's called. So that's one thing. And then as far as how often you want to train, well, at least training the same movement or muscle group once up to twice per week is a great goal to aim for. All of the programs we mentioned will have you doing that. They are also all focused on those multi-joint compound movements. And as far as how many sets you should do, meaning so a set is a group of reps. A rep is the single time you lift something, and a set of 10 reps means that you lifted something 10 reps in a row before you rest. And typically something like 2 to 3 sets per muscle or exercise every workout is a good number to aim for. These programs will have you doing that. As you've become a bit more experienced in the gym, started accumulating some experience there, aiming towards something like 10 tough sets per week for each muscle or each exercise is another really good target to aim for beginners or most people in general. Yeah. So that might look like something maybe 3 workouts per week with 3 sets each for a given muscle, or if you do 2 workouts per week, you might build up to 4 to 5 sets per workout, per exercise in this case. And as for how many reps you should do per set, we know that anything between like 5 up to 30 reps per set, as long as these are hard sets, meaning that you couldn't do a bunch of more reps after you reach that point, is going to be good for building muscle, and it's also going to be good for building strength. But from a practical perspective, sticking somewhere between a 5 to 15 rep range is really good, both for strength and muscle gains. Then if you want to branch out and specialize on strength for a while, you could creep down in the rep numbers for some period in your training, but around 5 to 15 is really good to aim for.
It's also a good rep range to learn the technique. If you were to do heavy singles or doubles at the beginning of your training career, your technique would probably break down quite a lot because it's so heavy for you, so you will never really learn how the movement is supposed to feel. But when you're doing, let's say 10 reps, because it's an even number, the first 8 reps might look awesome, and the last 2 might look a bit worse, but still fine. And then you build up your technique. And don't be too focused on being an expert when you're a beginner. It's okay to have suboptimal technique in the beginning. You're not going to break your body. It's going to get better the more you train it, as long as you don't go totally balls to the walls. But once again, if you're 40 years or older, you probably left those days behind you when you were young and dumb.
Yeah, hopefully. And lastly, on the topic of reps, it's good to know that last few heavy and slow reps in every set, those seem to be the ones that count the most when we're talking about muscle growth. So maybe not in your first few workouts, those can be light like all the way through, but eventually after a few weeks and you've been adding some weight or some reps into your sets, you want to reach those slow reps that are hard towards the end of the sets. That is kind of where the magic happens. So one of the things I encountered when I researched this episode was the idea that as you age, you might need, or there was a question, do you need longer recovery between workouts? And do you need longer recovery between your sets? And I saw that there's been some research into this with some hypothesis or theorization that this might be the case. But it seems to me that this is definitely drowned out by the individual variation and your own training experience. I mean, the general idea is still that you should stimulate your body by training and then rest for an appropriate amount of time before you work out again. And that is so very depending not only on your recovery capabilities, like how do you handle sleep and stress and nutrition, but also on how much have you been training? Do you have a lot of training experience? And maybe most importantly of all, how hard you train in each workout. And the type of workouts you're doing in the programs we mentioned earlier, they will typically need something like 2 to 3 days of recovery before you are ready to go again. And that's what the program will recommend you to do. After a super hard workout that you're not accustomed to, you might need almost a week of recovery. But I mean, if you do a super light workout, you can do that every day. And the sweet spot for most people is going to be somewhere in between those.
I agree. When I think back at the original question for this episode from Svenitor, if he has been working out since he was 15 and he reached his like peak performance at 35 and now he's 45, I could see him feeling like, if I do the same things now that I did 10 years ago, I need a bit more rest. I need a bit more rest between sets. I need more rest between workouts. But that's on an individual level and based on perception of how he felt 10 years ago, which might not be accurate all the time. And everybody who's trained for years knows that it goes up and down. You have great periods where you feel like you can exert yourself super much every workout and you just keep progressing. And then you have down periods where everything sucks. Exactly. This is just the circle of life at the gym for someone. Yeah. So
it might be, related to your sleep. You might have a minor infection that you don't know about, or it's just your natural rhythm.
Yeah,
that it's moving up.
So I wouldn't think too much about it. It's we know that if you're 45, your body should still be able to work out as much with as little or as much rest as when you were 35, physiologically speaking.
Yeah,
it's not that big of a difference.
No, it's not. And it's one of the cases where, at least if you have been doing some training earlier, you might know yourself better and kind of sense that that you might need a little bit more or less recovery. As for recovery between sets, there are cases both for longer and shorter rest periods. Once again, I don't think this is something you should change based on your age. Rather, just follow the general recommendations for resting between sets, which is that the most important thing of all is to rest long enough that you're able to complete your next set with a number of reps at the weight that you intended and with a good form in your eyes, with the technique that you want to. If you can do that, then you rested enough. And then if you want to delve into maybe squeezing together a big workout using very short rest periods or getting a crazy pump, you might be able to do that. Or you want to take longer rest periods because you want to focus on a few really super heavy sets, you can do that. But as a rule of thumb, something like 2 to 3 minutes between sets, hard sets, is good to aim for. When you are new to the gym, you might cut down that a bit, closer to 1 or 2 minutes, because you're not going to exert yourself as much in every set, so you can do them more often. But as you use heavier and heavier weights, you're probably going to want to extend that rest period a bit. But something like 2 minutes is good to aim for.
I would still caution a beginner to not be one of those people at the gym that only rest for 45 seconds to a minute and keep doing that through their whole training career, never seeing any good results. I would say it's more common that people rest too little than too much in the gym. So try resting for 3 minutes between heavy sets and see, this feels better.
Yeah, or I could double the amount of reps I do.
Exactly.
Then that's a sign that you're using too light weights.
Yep.
Okay, so that was the training side of things. Let's move on to the eating side of things. And here we've got one really common question, which is, does our metabolism drop after 40? And the answer is yes and no.
Yeah, the minute you turn 40, it drops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember Dan John saying something like when he was in his 20s, he could shed fat by going to the fridge and getting another 6-pack of beer.
Sure.
Maybe not entirely accurate.
Probably not.
So regarding the question, yeah, your metabolism or our metabolism generally drops as we age because our fat-free mass goes down. As mentioned earlier in the episode, we peak in our muscle mass and strength gains in general when we are in our 30s or maybe 20s, and then we typically and generally lose muscle mass as we age. And muscle mass or fat-free mass is the biggest determinant of our metabolism or our energy expenditure. So the more muscle mass or fat-free mass that we have, the more energy we're gonna burn. And if you lose that muscle mass, you're gonna burn less energy. But if we then were to look at metabolism per unit of fat-free mass, per kilo or per pound, then that number is actually constant from our 20s up to our 60s, at which point even that starts to decline. But it means that if you keep the same muscle mass or fat-free mass, you are going to keep pretty much the same metabolism or energy expenditure, which is another way to say it. So if you start training and gaining muscle, you might even increase your metabolism, which is cool. Yeah.
I just think about all the anecdotes people have of this. When I was young, I could eat 3 pizzas in a sitting and do this, and I never gained any weight. And I'm not saying they are wrong, but maybe they also led another lifestyle back then. Maybe they were, if they were like 17, they were out moving all day. They had activities all evenings or stuff like that. And also, I think people tend to forget that if you eat 3 pizzas in one sitting, you might not eat for like 12 or 15 hours afterwards. Those thin men who always claims to have these huge appetites without being able to gain weight, they also, if you look at their calorie intake during a week, they don't eat regularly enough to become fat.
Yeah.
It's I mean, if you think it's easy being this big, as I'm pointing to myself, you need to eat those 3 pizzas 3 times a day.
Exactly. It requires some dedication.
Yeah, it's a sport, man.
Yeah, those are rookie numbers in this racket.
No, but your main point here is don't worry about your metabolism too much.
Yeah, or at least know that you can affect it by building some damn muscle. And well, let's get into some nutrients, the macronutrients, or starting with energy, meaning calories, which is what we usually measure our energy in when we're talking about food. And well, we need calories every day to survive, and the amount of calories we put in our body is going to affect if we get bigger or smaller, if we expand or shrink. And really, how many calories you should eat per day comes down to your goal. So some of the people listening to this might be really skinny and want to bulk up. In that case, they need to be on a caloric surplus, eating more calories than they burn. A bunch of other people is going to be a bit overweight, wanting to lose weight. And in that case, you want to introduce a small caloric deficit to start losing weight and taking from those fat stores while you are building your muscles. And then another group of people, also probably a fairly big one, isn't going to really have a problem with their body weight per se, but they might feel a bit too soft in their bodies and they want to get harder and get some more definition. Well, and in that case, you might just stick to caloric balance, meaning that your intake matches what you expend, but you introduce strength training and you start to eating more protein, maybe watching your sleep a bit more, in which case you're going to lose fat and build muscle over time. And that is also something called a body recomposition or a caloric maintenance.
I feel like the key word was protein.
Yeah. In addition to the strength training that we've been talking about.
Of course, but if you're talking about diet, it's hard to talk about strength training without talking about protein.
Yeah, and when, as far as dieting goes for strength training, really calories and proteins are the 2 most important factors to consider.
Yeah.
Because we're going to get into carbs and fats, but they really don't matter a whole ton. What's going to really affect your results are going to be the calories and the protein.
I would say that they matter in the form of food being tasty, and food being a source of joy, and the social activities around food. They absolutely matter. And
do you know what also is a source of joy? Gaining muscle and strength. Nothing tastes as good as a 200-pound bench press feels.
Have you tried taking a big bite out of your biceps? Might taste really good.
So, getting into protein.
Yeah.
Well, your muscles are made mostly out of protein. And if you want to build bigger muscles, you gotta eat more protein. Not only to provide the building materials, but also to trigger the signal to build muscles. Because your body ain't gonna build more muscle to the same extent if it doesn't receive the amounts of protein that it wants. So protein also acts like a signal to start the muscle building process, especially in conjunction with strength training. And I don't mean that it has to happen close by, but if you have strength trained in the same day and you eat protein, it's gonna trigger a little bit of different responses in your body compared to if you hadn't been training that day. So it's your body's going to be on the lookout for that protein. And we see from plenty of research that beginners doing strength training up until a level of intake of around 1.6 grams of protein per kilo of body weight for a roughly normal weight person is gonna yield better and better results. Up to that level, you're gonna gain more muscle and more strength. But beyond that level, for a beginner, it doesn't really do any difference. It's not harmful, but you don't get more benefits. So you might eat something tastier if you want to.
We need to put this in context for the beginner, the new listener. How much protein is that compared to what people eat, ordinary people eat?
Typically, in the Western world, people eat around 1.1 gram of protein per kilo.
So you need to jack it up a bit.
Yeah, pump those numbers up. And I mean, if you are a normal weight adult, it boils down to one extra protein-rich meal.
Yeah.
So there might be an additional protein shake if you want to go that route. It might be taking slightly bigger servings of protein with the meals that you're already eating. Like if you get 5 to 10 extra grams per meal, that might be enough. Something like that. And in freedom units, it's 0.7 grams per pounds to land on that level. I also want to stress that reaching this level of protein intake, it's less important for a beginner than it is for someone who's been training for a while. It makes a bigger difference for people with longer training experiences who have pushed their bodies to a higher training state, who are more muscular. It's not as important for beginners, but there is still a significant benefit.
Yeah, and I would add that if your goal is to lose a bit of body fat, a bigger protein portion of a chicken breast or a white fish or something like that is going to make you feel more satiated after the meal. You're going to be full for longer. It's going to be easier to follow your diet if you have a lot of protein on your plate.
That might be the case.
Yeah.
If you are a bit more experienced, say that you've been training for a long time with a focus on gaining muscle, you might want to pump the number up to 2 grams of protein per kilo every day. Or if you are on the beginner side, but you are deciding to do a weight loss phase, you want to cut and lose body fat, but build or maintain your muscle mass, you could also shoot for around 2 grams of protein per kilo. If we get into the per meal basis, a great number to aim for is something like 30 grams of protein per meal as the lower threshold. More isn't bad, but if you want to get all your protein in from your meals and not going into protein shakes or something like that, try to get at least 30 grams of protein per meal. If you're a big guy, you might want to get closer to 40 or maybe 50 grams of protein per meal.
So
depending on how many times you eat per day.
So 30 grams is a bit more than 1 ounce, right?
Something, maybe. Who knows? Bald eagle.
Imperial units are weird, man.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Twitter threads of all time is a science guy, I think he's European, who discovers all the different types of imperial units and writes like a 100 tweet thread about it.
Because I mean, there are like a dozen different types of ounces, so let's not go there. But I did mention meal frequency.
Oh,
and this was a hot topic like the last decade, garnering a lot of research, going from something as being seen as weird and crazy to being seen as the fountain of youth and a panacea, to now, when the evidence is in, has been shown to not really matter a whole ton. You seem to be free to eat once a day if you want to, or like a ton of times per day if you want to. And it doesn't really seem to matter on a general level in much of any aspect. On an individual level, it might have a huge difference. Some people might not enjoy fasting at all. Some people don't enjoy frequent meals at all. Some people might get headaches from one or the other, and some people might get achy stomachs from one or the other.
Some people just complain a lot.
Yeah. As far as muscle building goes, getting in like 3 to 4 meals a day is a good time-tested recommendation. You could go to extremes if you want to, eating just once a day if you want to be super weird, or eating 8 times a day like I do because I work next to my fridge. But yeah, it really doesn't matter a whole ton, so just stick with what you like personally and try to distribute that protein over the day.
I usually eat 2 times a day. Lunch and dinner.
That is insane.
Yeah,
so let's touch upon carbs and fats quickly. Carbs is not essential for your survival. That does not mean that they might not be helpful or enjoyable, but we've had the low carb, high fat craze recently, and it's
everybody died.
But it's good to know that you don't have to eat carbs unless you want to. But also on the flip side, carbs are not inherently fattening.
Oh.
So you don't need to watch out for carbs either. And you can get a very high proportion of your daily energy intake from carbs and just be fine. It also doesn't matter if you eat them in the evening or in the morning. It doesn't make a difference. What affects your rate of fat gain or body weight gain is your total caloric intake. So eat all the carbs you want if that's your fancy. I mean, there are tons of nutritious and tasty carbs, so eat those if you want to. Fats, on the other hand, they are essential. Some few grams of fat are essential on their own. A bunch more fat is necessary to get all the fat-soluble vitamins from your diet. Yeah. And a common recommendation is to aim for like 1 gram of fat per kilo body weight, or just under half a gram per pound to get all those bases covered. And I'd say that is what you get in a typical Western diet.
I would say in a general sense, there's the exceptions to this, but in the modern Western world, it's not hard to reach your fat goals.
No, it's not.
It's on the opposite, quite easy.
Yeah. So don't go too much below that, at least not for extended periods.
No.
You could go higher though if you want to go the low carb, high fat route. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Should we mention supplements quickly?
Take your creatine.
Buy specialized over 40 supplements. You need the over 40 supplement.
Every time I see a supplement that these are for men, or these are for women, or these are for people over 40 or 50, I want to rage quit this world. Don't spend your money on a lot of supplements. We know that one might be useful for you if you start strength training, and that's creatine, the cheapest kind, creatine monohydrate. It helps you become a little bit stronger, a little bit faster. And it might also have some added benefits for your general health and your brain.
That's going to be fun to follow in the coming years. I think we're going to see a lot more brain research on creatine, which seems to be generally good for the brain, or especially if your brain's been stressed in some way, like sleep deprived, or you're working hard or whatever. Who knows, maybe like Silicon Valley is going to get on a creatine craze just for boosting their work days.
But the good thing about creatine is it's quite cheap compared to a lot of other supplements out there. It's easy to manufacture, and the costs are low, which make the supplement industry don't they don't want you to just buy creatine. They want you to buy the high margin products that they can sell you that has zero benefits in most cases.
Exactly, because it's a commodity. It doesn't matter who makes the creatine monohydrates.
And you and your body makes creatine naturally, and it makes enough of it in some cases, but adding a little bit more has shown to be beneficial, especially if you strength train. So
yeah, something like 3 to 5 grams per day, if you want to go into that. It will cost you, I don't know how much can it be, like $10 a month, maybe? Something like that. Yeah, and the other one, at least that I take, because I take creatine daily. Once again, I go on and off a bit just because I forget to purchase a new one. The other one I take pretty frequently is protein powder.
Yeah.
Because it's convenient, it's practical, it's a really high quality protein source, and it's fairly cheap compared to a lot of food, at least there in Sweden. It might be a different case in like the US of A.
Yeah. I also don't want to call it a supplement. It's just food in powder form. It's protein-rich food with low calories because they don't add fat or carbs to it. Yeah. And it's a cheap way to get some extra protein in your diet.
Do you know what is enjoyable?
Not taking protein powder.
Taking protein powder with like half a cup of oatmeal in it with water. Shake it, and then you just turn that shaker upside down, right down your throat. That is tasty. That is enjoyable.
I took my last protein shake like 3 or 4 years ago or something like that, and I have never looked back.
I haven't taken a protein shake for like 36 hours now because I ran out, and I'm just losing all my gains here.
Yeah. Did you? Because you definitely ordered some already, right?
Yes.
And did you pay for extra fast delivery?
No, I did not. I don't think that was an option.
Would you have?
Maybe.
You have a problem, man.
No, I can quit anytime I want.
Anyway, we don't sell protein powder, so we can't make any money from it. That's good.
We need some affiliate links. No, but really, I mean, it is a good thing.
It is. I just don't enjoy it. I like food in food form, not powder form. I have a colleague here at the Stockholm office that says if he could just take a pill instead of eating, he would do that. And I just want to smack him when he says it. It's the weirdest thing. Food is so important for life, love, everything, friendship, everything evolves around food.
Bench pressing.
Yeah, I eat while I bench press.
Yeah. All right, so this was one of our longest episodes in a bit.
Yeah, and it was a nice episode. It's a good topic. We should do one for the even elder segments.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Because if you're in your 70s, just getting started, or even in your 80s, or if you're a child of if your parent is in that age and you want to encourage them to get started, because we've seen so many benefits from 80 years old going to the gym for the first time in their life, and they build muscle mass at a surprisingly fast rate too. Yeah, but they do it from really low levels of muscle mass.
Exactly. Yeah, well, great topic. I hope we did it justice. And
tell us on our subreddit Strength Log what we missed or what we should cover next. We have a mega thread where you can ask your questions to this podcast. It's pinned in our community there over on Reddit. I'll link to it.
All right, thank you for listening, and catch you next week.
Train hard, eat well, die anyway.